She wasn't supposed to be there. Marley Reyes had followed a hunch into a forgotten corner of the forest where an old concrete door lay buried beneath vines and silence. Behind it, a rusting KGB vault, untouched since the Cold War. But what she found inside wasn't just history, it was a fleet of modified luxury cars, brimming with secrets, tech, and a past that refused to stay buried. Before we crack open the vault, let us know where you're watching from. And if stories like this make your engine race, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's tale is even deeper, darker, and more unbelievable than this one. The trail was overgrown, half swallowed by time, the kind of path only deer and the truly stubborn dared to tread. Marley Reyes fit into the latter. Her boots sank slightly into the damp earth, leaves brushing against her thighs as she pushed deeper into the thicket. This wasn't part of her usual ride. Her dirt bike, hidden a few hundred yards back beneath a camo tarp, still ticked softly from the run. She hadn't planned to go off-grid today, but sometimes instinct spoke louder than logic, and today it had pulled her here. The forest grew quieter the farther she went, as if the air itself were holding its breath. The trees thinned slightly just ahead, and that's when she saw it, a jagged slab of reinforced concrete, half buried in moss and mud, rising from the earth like a forgotten tombstone. Marley stepped closer, brushing away vines and debris with her gloves. Her fingers hit rusted steel. A handle, a wheel lock, industrial, Soviet. She recognized the build. This was military, or what used to be. She crouched, tracing the faded red star stenciled above the seam. Below it, barely visible through decades of grime, were 3 letters: KGB. Her pulse quickened. The rumors were real. The ones old men whispered about in scrapyards and border towns of Cold War stockpiles, hidden in the woods, packed with vehicles, weapons, and secrets no one dared claim. Most dismissed them as stories. Marley had just found proof otherwise. With effort, she twisted the locking mechanism. It fought her, groaning with the protest of rust and time, but it moved. Dust coughed from the hinges as the door cracked open an inch, then 2. She pulled harder. The seal broke, and beyond it, darkness not empty, but expectant. She grabbed the flashlight from her belt and clicked it on. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing a concrete tunnel stretching forward into silence. Walls lined with conduit. Thick power cables coiled like snakes. She stepped inside. The air was cold, dry, and smelled of oil and metal. Her boots echoed. 30 yards in, the tunnel opened. Marley froze. Before her was a cavernous room the size of a football field. A bunker. And inside, bathed in the flickering light of overhead sodium lamps, were rows upon rows of cars. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. Parked with eerie precision. Rolls-Royces, Bentleys, Soviet ZILs, Mercedes limousines, some armored, some with blacked-out windows. All immaculate, as if waiting for orders that would never come. Marley stepped closer, heart pounding. These weren't just cars. They were machines of power, modified, concealed, and preserved, and she had just become the first person to see them in over 30 years. Marley didn't move at first. Her flashlight wavered slightly, its beam catching chrome bumpers, license plates in Cyrillic, and hoods that gleamed beneath decades of dust. It was too quiet. The kind of quiet that pressed against your chest, like you'd just stepped inside a memory that didn't belong to you. She took a slow breath and walked forward, boots tapping lightly against the polished concrete floor. Whoever had built this place hadn't planned on it being found. And yet, here she was, the dust of another world clinging to her jacket sleeves. The air felt frozen in time. Each vehicle was positioned precisely, like soldiers at attention, spotless, unmoved, untouched. Marley paused at the first row. A jet-black ZIL 41047 limo stood before her, long as a boat and twice as heavy. Its windows were tinted pitch, its grille lined with stainless teeth. There were small marks along the edge of the trunk residue from what looked like magnetic rigging. Maybe for jamming antennas. Maybe for something worse. Marley ran her hand gently along the cold surface. It wasn't just a car. It was a vessel of secrets. To its left sat a Mercedes 600 Grosser, the kind dictators once rode in. Its tires were deflated but still intact. The dashboard inside was pristine wood paneling, analog dials, a microphone mounted on the center console. Marley squinted. It wasn't a CB radio. It was older, military grade. She opened the driver's side door slowly, the creak echoing through the cavern. The smell of aged leather and engine oil rushed out, thick and strangely familiar. She leaned in, hands on the steering wheel, the leather warm where her fingers pressed. Everywhere she looked, there were strange additions, cables tucked into seams that shouldn't have gaps, compartments with fingerprints in the dust. She moved from one car to the next, noting the pattern. Each one was luxurious, powerful, and weaponized in subtle ways. Slit vents for surveillance cameras, bulky antenna arrays built into bumpers, buttons labeled in Russian. Each car had its own language, but they were all saying the same thing. These were spy cars, and not just any. These were curated, purpose-built, meant for people with power, people whose lives were riddled with shadows. Marley had worked on classic imports before a diplomat's Jag, a retired collector's Gaz Volga, but nothing like this. This was a different echelon, government grade, untouchable. She paused beside a Bentley Turbo R. Its hood ornament was missing, but in its place sat a small, steel-plated crest. The old KGB insignia, faint but unmistakable. Marley stepped back. That was when she noticed something strange. At the far end of the row, one of the cars had its door slightly ajar. It was the only one. Her breath caught. That door wasn't like that when she came in. Something inside the bunker had already been disturbed, and Marley Reyes was no longer sure she was alone. Marley's breath slowed, but not from calm, from instinct. She took a step back, her boots now almost silent against the polished floor. The ajar car door ahead, maybe 20 yards out, gaped like a mouth caught mid-sentence. Her flashlight swept the bunker again. No sound. No footprints in the dust. But something was off. Everything else had been sealed with military precision. That one door, a matte black GAZ-14 Chaika, stood open just enough to whisper intent. Whether it had been forgotten long ago or disturbed recently, Marley couldn't say. But it pulled at her. She approached carefully. The Chaika loomed closer, its presence more ominous than the others. The Soviet luxury sedan was huge, elongated body, reinforced doors, trim that suggested authority, but not elegance. It looked like it had been built to intimidate, not impress. As she reached the open door, she paused and listened again. Still silence. Then, with a measured breath, she reached forward and swung the door fully open. Inside, the car was immaculate. The leather seats had barely aged, and the dashboard looked untouched. A thin layer of dust lay on the armrest, except for a single streak where a hand had brushed it clean. Marley's stomach tensed. That was fresh. Whoever had been in here had done so recently. She reached inside and opened the glove compartment. It clicked open with a softness that felt rehearsed, like the car remembered how. Inside was a small leather pouch tied with aged string. She pulled it out slowly, holding it in her hands like it might crumble. The leather was cracked, but intact. Something small and metallic shifted inside. She untied the knot, heart thudding. Inside were 2 keys. One was an ignition key, long, black plastic, with a red insignia faded on the handle, probably for the Chaika. But the second was strange. Smaller, solid brass. No teeth. Just a rounded shaft and a triangular bow etched with an emblem she didn't recognize. A hammer and sickle wrapped in thorns. Not military standard. This was ceremonial, or symbolic. Also in the pouch, a folded piece of paper, yellowed and brittle. She unfolded it carefully, Cyrillic, handwritten in black ink, filled the page. Marley didn't speak Russian, but she could recognize names and numbers. At the top, Operatia Grom, Operation Thunder. Below it, dates most from 1986. And at the bottom, a single word, written in English, sleeper. Marley sat back on her heels. The implications gnawed at her. This wasn't just about old spy cars or Cold War relics. This was an operation, something that hadn't been declassified, hadn't been meant to survive the fall of the Soviet Union. Yet here it was, intact, waiting, and now, in her hands. She glanced back at the Chaika's door. The dust on the floor beneath it looked disturbed, but not just by her. Someone else had touched this car. Maybe not long ago. Maybe they were still here. Marley stood slowly, eyes scanning the vast, silent expanse of the bunker. Every instinct she had the same ones honed under hoods and in junkyards. The kind that warned her when something was about to snap, now whispered the same thing. You're not alone. But no footsteps, no breath, no echo but her own. Still, she moved with caution, circling around the Chaika to the passenger side. Her flashlight's beam quivered slightly, casting long shadows across the floor. The stillness felt rehearsed. Too perfect. She opened the passenger door. It groaned louder than expected, metal stiff from disuse. Inside, the seat had collapsed slightly with age, the cushion sunken. But what caught her eye wasn't the upholstery. It was the line barely visible between the seat and the floor pan. A panel. She crouched, brushed her gloved hand across it. Hollow. She pried it gently with the edge of her flashlight. It gave way with a soft pop. Beneath the floor was a shallow compartment. Inside, a thick envelope sealed in wax, a leather-bound notebook, and a small steel-cased device that looked like it belonged in a museum or a war room. She lifted the envelope first. The wax bore the same thorn-wrapped sickle emblem as the key from the pouch. She didn't open it yet. Her eyes drifted to the notebook, its edges frayed, its pages water-warped but mostly intact. She opened it, careful not to tear the binding. Inside were diagrams, hand-drawn sketches of the cars in the bunker, not just the Chaika, but several others she'd already passed. But they weren't simple mechanical schematics. These showed modifications, compartments, surveillance equipment, armor plating. One page had a crude layout of a back seat with red ink circling an area labeled Microphone. Javiolini microphones. Live lines. Another had a drawing of a ZIL with arrows pointing to the tailpipe, labeled gas dispersal unit. Spy cars, yes. But some were more than just for listening. Some were weapons on wheels. Marley exhaled slowly. Her fingers brushed the steel device next. She lifted it gently. It was no larger than a lunchbox, with a toggle switch, analog dial, and a cracked Bakelite handle. A tag was tied to its side with twine. The handwriting was English this time. Do not power in confined space. Active signal storage. She didn't need a full translation to know this thing could still be dangerous. Or valuable. She set it down, then finally looked at the envelope again. She hesitated. Whatever was inside, it had been hidden for a reason, but she couldn't walk away now. The wax cracked as she broke the seal. Inside was a single photograph, grainy, black and white. It showed a younger man standing beside a ZIL, hand on the hood, grinning slightly. It was her grandfather, the man who died when she was 12. The one who never talked about his past. Marley stared, heart pounding. What the hell had he been part of? She stared at the photograph longer than she should have. The edges trembled in her gloved hands, not from the cold, but from something deeper: disbelief, confusion, maybe grief she hadn't let herself feel in years. Her grandfather, Armando Reyes, had always been a quiet man, stern, but kind. He'd taught her to use a torque wrench before she could ride a bike, and he'd kept a tidy collection of tools wrapped in oilcloth, always locked in a wooden crate in the garage. But he had never spoken about his past, only that he'd worked in signals. Marley had assumed military radio, Not Cold War espionage. She tucked the photo into her jacket, heart still thumping, and stood. Whatever this place was, her grandfather had been connected to it. Not as a mechanic, not just as a soldier, as something else. She turned back toward the deeper part of the bunker. If there were answers here, they were further in. Marley moved through the next corridor, her flashlight tracing old signage in Cyrillic, arrows pointing left and right, rusted steel doors long since seized shut. She paused at one, with a shattered window set high in the frame. A red sign above it read, "Прослушивающая комната." She didn't know the language, but the structure of the room was unmistakable. A listening station. She pushed the door. It gave, with a reluctant groan, metal grinding on concrete. Inside, the room opened into a curved wall lined with consoles, rows of knobs, analog meters, and spools of ancient reel-to-reel tape. Headphones dangled from metal hooks. In the center, a desk held a bank of switches and a logbook open to a page dated March 1987. Columns of frequencies and brief notes written in rapid Cyrillic. She reached for the switch on the nearest machine. It didn't respond. The whole system was dead. Or so she thought. As she turned to leave, a faint hum buzzed beneath the desk. She crouched, hand brushing over wires, and then she found it. A backup generator, probably battery-based, nestled beneath a false panel. It had been modified, upgraded not in the 80 seconds, but recently, within the last decade, maybe less. She flipped the toggle. A warm, orange glow filled the console. Several reels began to spin, and the speakers crackled to life, not loudly, but enough for Marley to make out the soft hiss of recorded airwaves. Then a voice. Russian. Male. Calm. Repeating coordinates. A pause. Then a second voice. Fainter. English. Female. Responding. Copy Alpha. Cargo secure. Awaiting drop. Marley blinked. This wasn't archival. This wasn't history. These tapes were new, or someone had kept the station running long after the world had moved on. She reached for the logbook again, flipping to the final page. A single entry dated just 5 years ago. One line written in English this time. Asset compromised. Bunker remains hidden. Await further orders. Her stomach turned. This place wasn't abandoned. It had just been waiting. She didn't remember much about the day her grandfather died, just the smell of engine oil on his flannel shirt and the way his hands, though aged, never shook when he turned a bolt. Marley had been 12, sitting on the garage floor with a carburetor in her lap, when the call came from the hospital. Her mother cried for hours. Her father never said a word. Armando Reyes was gone, buried with a military medal and a closed casket. The man who raised her on socket, sets, and silence had never spoken a word about the Cold War, Russia, or anything beyond spark plugs and pistons. But now he was here frozen in time, caught in black and white, smiling beside a Soviet spy car, deep beneath a forest, in a country he wasn't even supposed to be in. She held the photo up to her flashlight again. The image was grainy, but the man was unmistakable: square jaw, thick eyebrows, the faint scar across the bridge of his nose she used to trace with her finger as a kid. The backdrop was the same bunker wall she now stood beside. It wasn't a coincidence. This place hadn't just held secrets, it held her bloodline. She lowered the photo slowly, a chill crawling up her spine. What if everything she thought she knew about him, about her family, was wrong? What if her obsession with machines wasn't an accident, but inheritance? Her eyes scanned the room again. The listening station, the running tape, the updated equipment. If her grandfather had been part of this operation, then someone else knew. Someone had kept it alive, maybe even after the Soviet Union collapsed. She moved back toward the garage floor, crossing rows of spy cars with renewed focus. She had missed something. There had to be more. In the far corner of the bunker, beyond the last column of limousines, a steel locker stood bolted to the wall. It was the only part of the room that looked touched by time, a padlock long rusted, the paint flaking. Marley knelt and pulled a pick set from her jacket pocket. 3 clicks, and a twist later, the lock dropped to the floor. The door creaked open. Inside, sealed in plastic, were several reels of Super 8 film, a metal case the size of a small briefcase, and a bundle of yellowed manila folders bound in twine. She reached for the case. It was heavy, too heavy to be empty. She popped the latches and opened it slowly. Inside was a projector, modified with cables running to a modern power pack, and a single reel labeled simply, Operative Reyes, Final Brief. Marley sat back on her heels. Her grandfather hadn't just worked here. He had been assigned here, and whatever mission he'd left unfinished. It hadn't ended with his death. It had been waiting for her. The projector whirred to life with a flicker and a hum, the bulb's faint glow casting shadows on the cold bunker wall. Marley sat cross-legged on the concrete floor, the Super 8 reel feeding slowly through the spools. The film was silent at first, crackled frames of static, then a black screen with white Russian characters she couldn't read. Then came a face. Her grandfather, younger than she remembered. His hair was dark, combed back neatly, eyes alert and unflinching. He wore a military coat, not American issue, but something foreign. His expression was unreadable, but not cold. Focused. Behind him, the backdrop was unmistakable. This bunker, the very wall she now stared at. He looked into the camera like he was staring through time. And then he spoke. Not in English. Not at first. The audio buzzed as he switched between languages. Russian, then Spanish, then finally English. His voice was steady, practiced. If you're watching this, then the operation has failed. Marley's breath hitched. She leaned forward, heart racing. My name is Armando Reyes. Operative number 2141, G. Embedded asset. Codename, Pilgrim. He paused, jaw tight. This facility was created under joint initiative covert operations between Soviet counterintelligence and neutral field engineers. I was one of 3, the only one not born on Russian soil. The screen flickered again. His image shifted as he stood, revealing a row of cars, sleek, black, ominous. The same she'd passed only hours ago. These vehicles were never for show. Each was designed for cross-border surveillance, mobile interception, and if necessary, elimination. Targets ranged from diplomats to defectors. The bunker was called Orlovo 13. Hidden. Off books. No records in Moscow or Washington. Marley's skin crawled. Armando turned back to the camera. But we weren't just mechanics. We were custodians. Each of us carried codes, keys, and kill switches. Fail-safes, in case one of us turned. His voice dropped lower. I turned. Marley's mouth went dry. I didn't trust their mission. I saw the faces of the people we followed. Families. Civilians. I sabotaged the last build, made the fuel system leak, the engine fail under high load. I told them it was a bad batch. But I knew what I was doing. And they knew it too. The reel skipped, a burst of static blurring the image. I buried the final files under the passenger seat of the Chaika. If you found them, then you already know. The key should still be in the pouch. The brass one. It doesn't open a car. He leaned in, eyes suddenly softer. It opens a box in the northeast wall of this bunker behind panel 6. I hid the real intelligence there. Names, routes, everything. I was supposed to destroy it, but I couldn't. Someone needed to know. He took a breath, long and tired. If you're blood, then finish what I couldn't. Not for me. For them. The screen froze on his face. Then the film snapped in the reel. Darkness again. But Marley wasn't alone. Not anymore. The air felt heavier now. Marley sat frozen in the projector's afterglow. The last frame of her grandfather's face still burned into her vision. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from something harder, to name the weight of truth colliding with blood, history reaching through steel and shadows to find her. She stood slowly, knees stiff from the cold floor, and looked toward the northeast wall. Panel 6. That's where he said it was. That's where the truth had waited, sealed away in silence. She moved fast, counting panels as she passed each car. 1, 2, 3. Each square was marked by faded red numbers, partially obscured by rust and age. 4, 5, 6. It was dented, the corners dark with moisture but still intact. She pried her fingers beneath the edge and pulled. The panel resisted at first, then gave with a loud metallic snap that echoed through the bunker like a gunshot. Behind it, a small steel box bolted to the concrete, the same emblem etched into its lid, the thorn-wrapped sickle. She reached into her jacket, pulled out the brass key, and slipped it into the lock. It turned effortlessly. The lid sprang open. Inside were folders, dozens of them, each labeled with years, countries, and code names. Marley flipped through them with growing unease. 1984, Vienna, OP, Crow's Nest. 1987, Washington, D.C., OP, Ghost Tunnel. 1991, Berlin, OP, Dusk March. Beneath the files sat a black cassette tape and a worn Polaroid. She turned it over. It was the same car that Chaika parked outside a government building, and standing next to it, arm on the hood, was a man she didn't recognize, and a woman she did. It was her mother, younger, dressed in a long coat, smiling. Marley's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't known, had never guessed. Her mother had always kept to herself, quiet and composed, like her father. Had she been involved? Was this why they never talked about the past? Suddenly, a sharp metallic clink echoed from behind her. She spun, flashlight raised. Nothing. The bunker still looked empty, but the sound hadn't been imagined. It had come from the back near the heavy storage shelves where crates were stacked high. She moved carefully, keeping low, stepping silently now. The temperature seemed to drop with each step, the only sound her own breath. Then, movement. A figure, barely visible, ducked between the rows of cars. Marley's chest tightened. She wasn't alone. She turned, sprinted toward the Chaika. The evidence had to be moved, taken, hidden, if necessary. She shoved the documents back into the lockbox, snapped it shut, and hoisted it under her arm. Whoever was here, they hadn't made their move yet, but they would. And whatever had kept this bunker a secret for decades was now waking up. She turned back toward the tunnel, but the steel door was no longer open. The door had been open. Marley was certain of it. She had cracked the seal herself, felt the air shift as it groaned open for the first time in decades. But now, the wheel lock was turned, the handle sealed shut from the other side. She was trapped. She stepped back from the tunnel, pulse pounding in her ears. The concrete felt colder than it had hours ago. The fluorescent overheads flickered weakly, casting shadows that shifted with every breath she took. Whoever was here, they'd locked her in. Not to kill her. Not yet. Whoever it was, wanted something first. The box under her arm felt suddenly heavier, like it carried more than just files and tape. It carried leverage, truth, bloodlines, and someone out there wanted it buried again. Marley didn't run. She didn't panic. She did what she always did when something broke. She looked for the fix. She turned toward the bunker's main floor. The cars. If the tunnel door was blocked, maybe one of the freight elevators in the far wall still worked, or maybe one of these Cold War beasts could punch a hole through the front gate. She'd rebuilt engines in worse shape than these. If she could get one to fire, she might still have a shot. She scanned the rows, calculating quickly. The ZILs were too slow, the grocer too fragile. Then her eyes fell on a machine she hadn't noticed before, tucked behind a tarp near the corner wall, cloaked in shadows. A Volga coupe, but modified, reinforced chassis, thicker tires. Something that looked like bullet shielding welded to the wheel wells. Civilian shape, military soul. She dropped the box in the passenger seat and popped the hood. Her flashlight beam caught a glint of chrome, a supercharged V8. Russian-built, but modified. Fuel lines were intact. Battery looked dead, but she could hotwire something with power from the listening station's generator. She moved quickly now, every motion precise, fluid. She was no longer afraid. She was working. Minutes later, jumper leads sparked. The dash lights blinked weakly, then flared. The ignition clicked. The engine coughed, then roared awake like it had been waiting for someone to turn the key for 30 years. She slammed the hood, climbed in, and shoved the stick into gear. Headlights lit the far wall. She accelerated slowly, letting the oil circulate. Then, she floored it. The Volga tore through the bunker, tires screaming against the concrete. The ramp to the tunnel door was narrow. One shot. The car hit it hard. Steel. Slammed into steel. The door didn't budge. She reversed, backed up 10 feet, and hit it again. Harder. The third time, the door groaned, metal splitting from its hinges. Light poured in from the cracks. Then she saw them. A figure on the outside, raising a hand to shield their face. Not a soldier. Not a spy. It was her mother. The car idled in place, steam rising from the radiator as the fractured bunker door groaned on its hinges. Marley stared through the cracked windshield, barely able to process the silhouette on the other side of the light. Her mother, older, thinner, but unmistakable, stood framed in the fading sunlight, her coat flapping in the cold wind, hand raised not in warning, but in recognition. For a long moment, neither moved. The bunker behind Marley still buzzed faintly, its secrets laid bare, its ghosts stirred. She killed the engine and stepped out of the car, legs stiff, heart thundering in her chest. The box sat in the passenger seat behind her, holding every answer she hadn't known she needed. Her mother stepped forward. They stood just feet apart now. Neither spoke at first. "I was going to tell you," her mother said softly, voice weathered. "One day." Marley looked at her. Really looked. For the first time, she saw beyond the careful silences, the evasive answers. She saw a woman who had carried too much for too long. "Why didn't you?" she asked, throat raw. "Because I thought I left it behind. Him. All of it." Her mother's eyes glistened. "I never thought you'd find this place. I never wanted you to." "I didn't go looking for him," Marley said. "I was chasing a rusted rumor in the woods, that's all." Her mother gave a sad smile. "So was I. Once." They sat on the edge of the bunker's ruined ramp, the Volga humming faintly behind them. Marley told her everything, the listening station, the photos, the files, the final recording. Her mother said little, but she didn't flinch. She just listened. When Marley finished, her mother reached into her coat and pulled out a key, not the brass one. A simple ignition key, old and worn smooth. She held it out. "He left this with me," she said. "Told me if I ever came back, it would mean the past had caught up." Marley took the key and turned it over in her hand. "Did you ever love him?" she asked. "I never stopped," her mother whispered. The wind picked up, rustling the tarp that had once concealed the Volga. Marley looked back at the car, scarred now, but alive, like the story itself. She rose to her feet, brushed dust from her jacket, and walked back to the car. She placed the box in the trunk and slammed it shut. "What are you going to do with all this?" her mother asked. Marley looked toward the horizon. "Fix it. Share it. Tell the story right." And she meant it, not just the story of spies and stolen cars, but the human one. The father who tried to undo a mistake. The daughter who stumbled into the ruins of legacy. The mother who buried her truth too deep. Now, it would be brought to light. She got behind the wheel, the engine purring beneath her, and for the first time in her life, Marley Reyes didn't feel like she was running from something. She was driving toward it.